Well, g'day everyone. Welcome to Life in the Peloton. We're back for another episode, and actually I'm joined this week by a special guest to help me intro this very special episode. Ian Boswell, all the way from Vermont, USA. Mate, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to finally be on. I've been a long-time listener of Life in the Peloton. I've never been a guest, so happy to actually finally be invited on the show.
You've leapfrogged it. You're not just a guest, you're part of the show now. You're introing it. You're just essentially a co-host.
Yeah, I'm in the deep water. I mean, we've had a lot of both experience in podcasting, from our own podcast to doing stuff with the cycling podcast. So we've kind of been living parallel lives on separate continents.
Anyone doesn't know who Ian Boswell is. He's 32 years old from Vermont, USA, been 10 years as a pro on the road, riding for a team like Sky, but finished also with Katusha in 2019. But that wasn't it for Boz. He decided to jump off-road and do a bit of gravel as we know it now, and he won the biggest gravel event, the Unbound 200 mile. That's 200 mile, not 200K, so like epic length in 2021. But he's also got his own podcast, Breakfast with Boz, and we cross paths in the Peloton, but I don't remember that much, because you were often at one end of the Peloton on the hills, I was at the other, and I want to say vice versa, but I can't comment on the flats. Maybe you handled yourself a bit better on the flats crosswinds. Boz, what was our experience in the pro Peloton?
We definitely raced together. We were also on very different teams. I think especially the time when I was at Sky, we always had, Frumey or Thomas or someone riding at the front. You were lucky to have the Yates brothers as your team leaders. And they're just like, hey guys, we're just going to sit at the back until the last, till the last climb, and then we'll move up then. So we definitely encountered each other, but I wouldn't say I'm a specialist at the flats at all. I mean, there are a handful of times just being at Sky that you make the split in the crossing just because you're already at the front and it happens behind you. You don't really know, but I wasn't one riding across gaps and making, people hurt in the crosswinds, at least, maybe more on the hills. No, I mean, we definitely, kind of ran in the same circles, but you were in Girona, I was in Nice. So, we were kind of always like one step removed, but we definitely, I'm sure, had our fair share of encounters out on the road.
Well, let's get to the point why we're chatting on this episode. This episode is going to be called What is Mountain Biking? Why the hell are we talking about that? Well, because Ian and I are going across to do Cape Epic, and they call it the Tour de France of mountain biking. It's the Untamed African mountain bike race. 8 days, 650K, 15,000 meters of climbing. That is what I'm most scared about. It's open to both professionals and amateur mountain bike races. It's like a fully supported mountain bike race. Everything's looked after. You get in, they even wash your bikes. There's a big food hall. They've got tents. We've actually got a camper as well. Pairs racing. It's something completely different to what we're used to, but in a weird way, it's sort of similar because it's teams racing off-road. Boz, what do you really know about Cape Epic?
I mean, I think on the periphery, I always knew what it was. I mean, I started off racing mountain bikes, kind of locally in Oregon. And then I found the road bike and kind of excelled. And I kind of grew up through this generation in U.S. cycling when everyone wanted to be a road racer. So I went down that path. But I've known a number of people who have done it, even a couple of South Africans who have, raced in it. I mean, I guess when you're racing on the road, like that's the center of your universe. And like, oh, what is this like joke mountain bike race happening in South Africa? It can't be that hard. Yeah. But the more I've learned about it, the more I realize it really is kind of like, a Paris-Nice or something. It's 8 days. And although, you only said it's 650K, it doesn't sound like that long. Having dabbled in mountain biking a little bit over the last couple months, you do not ride along at 40K an hour. So all of a sudden, a 100K stage is like, a 200K, road race. I think physically, like, probably pretty similar demands to like a week-long stage race, just because it is so long. It could be hot there. Both you and I mean, we still haven't really stacked up our technical skills, against one another and see kind of who's going to be leading, the technical sections, who's going to be doing tail whips off the jumps. I mean, it's definitely it's a famous race. I think everyone who knows about it and everyone who I've told that I'm going to the event, they're like, oh, like that's on my bucket list of like one event I would love to do. I think a lot of people, recreational amateur riders, like they want to go do like the Etapta Tour and they want to do Cape Epic. I think those are kind of the two big international events that most people, any cyclist wants to do in their life. And somehow you and I are fortunate enough to give it a go.
Well, the podcast is being brought to you this year by Rapha, our major sponsor. And one of the things that I'm really enjoying about mountain biking, as you just said then, I've had to go out and train, I've sort of had to go out and try and learn a new sport, is the attire. One thing I'm doing is mix-matching and crossing this sort of lycra and baggies, another word, the lingo, all the lingo I'm starting to get used to as well now. And this is something that I think Rapha do really good is the trail wear. They've got the baggy top, they've got even trail pants. It's so good. I remember last winter pulling on pants, going out riding. It sounds ridiculous if you're a road cyclist riding in pants, but when you're on the mountain bike, you get home, you strip these pants off, you get completely covered in mud and you clean underneath. It's so nice. That's something that I'm really loving about Rapha too, is that they've got this whole other range for this new sport that I'm going into now. Boz, have you been discovering the new things, well, I guess reconnecting again with mountain biking? One thing you said before was you've been out training, getting used to it again. Is it something you're really noticing you've had to get used to? One thing I've noticed is I've just had to change my pedal stroke a lot. From the road, it was all about putting power down. Yeah, okay, efficiently, but when you're on the road, efficiently is it's a loose term, I think. Once you're on rocks, loose rocks going uphill, especially, I notice, I try to just muscle it out road style. And next thing you know, you're unclipping, your back wheel's sliding. I was like, I've got to relearn how to pedal almost.
Yeah, 100%. I actually learned this a couple of years ago. I was out fat biking in the snow, and one of my buddies who, is very much a casual rider, I kept riding up all these little, it's all like groomed out snowmobile trails, and he was riding up, and I'm like, I'm way stronger than him. Why can't I ride up this? Because I was just trying to force it. I'm like, cool, I can just stomp on the pedals and get up to it. It's like, he was just riding smooth. And that's one thing I think I've learned is like, you can't just, in road cycling, you kind of just force things. You can just like, cool, I'm just going to tack up the hill and I'll get up faster. And mountain biking, you're like, all right, I need to go smooth. I need to be steady. You need to be efficient, keep your tires on the ground. But I am curious about your talking about Rapha clothing. Are you going to wear long-fingered gloves? Because I was just out in Texas at a mountain bike camp and I got reamed for wearing short-fingered, and it was hot out there. And I said, do I need to wear long-fingered gloves? And said, yes, you abs. I'm like, but why? It's not like, my fingers weren't slipping on the brakes. It's not like if you crash, you're going to I guess you could tear your fingertips off. But is that one of the things you've adopted is long-fingered gloves?
Yeah, look, I struggle with it too, Ian. I was just like, why? My hands are so hot. Like my gloves instantly were completely drenched from sweat because I'm not used to having long finger gloves on in summer. The trails that I ride near my place, the Cobor Ridge, they're pretty overgrown and, you got to bash your way through most of the time because there's not enough people riding on the trails. So I understood then and there why you have long fingered gloves on, because a couple of days I went without gloves altogether. My hands got ripped up from blackberry bushes and things like that. Most of the time, and I think in Cape Epic, we're not going to have that problem because the trails are very well groomed. But it's one of the things that becomes, I guess, part of the scene. Like I said before, with the baggy clothes and let's go to road cycling. Why do we do certain things? It's maybe not for performance. It's the style, isn't it? And it's coming across from road. You sort of notice those little intricate things that you're like, I would never do that on the road.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned like the baggy pants, and I was at a mountain bike thing down in Georgia back in January, and one of my colleagues at Wahoo and friend, we did this race, and he had these like sweet baggy pants. I'm like, those, and we just went out for like an evening, like, a 15K cruise the night before the race just because we flew in late. And I was like, that looks so cool. And I'm over there like messing around with leg warmers and, booties. And like, he just like slipped these pants on over his bib shorts. I'm like, we can also go get a burrito afterwards and you look normal. I look like a total cyclist walking into this restaurant.
Well, Cape Epic, like we spoke about, it's a massive event. There's about just over 1,000 people going to the event. And one thing I'm going to be taking with me over to South Africa, Boz, will be my Athletic Greens AG1 travel packs. That's the way that I like to start every day. As I've heard, because there's the sheer amount of people there in just this small area, pushing themselves to the max each day. There's big food tents, close contact. The immune system is at a very low and people are naturally going to get sick. It's one thing I'm a little bit worried about. And apart from good personal hygiene, I think you need to make sure your gut health, your overall nutrition balance is being taken care of to fight this. AG1 has this unique combination of antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, dairy-free probiotics, superfood complex and enzyme complex. It's an all-in-one pack. I'm going to need everything to be topped up for optimal health while I'm over there riding my bike in Cape Epic. From my gut health with probiotics to the recovery and performance support and the all-round health with my vitamins and minerals and superfood enzyme complexes. I actually can't think of a better time right now than to have my AG1 when I'm traveling on an 8-day mountain bike race, camping around with 1,000 plus others. I'm going to start each day with my AG1 travel pack, already portion size. I'll rip it open, pour it into my shaker, add some water, and down the hatch it'll go. It's that simple. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, the Athletic Greens is giving you a 1 free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Boz, this is a good opportunity for you to go across to athleticgreens.com/lifeinthepeloton and get yourselves some travel packs, mate. You're going to need it over there. I tell you, it's bloody hard, and Athletic Greens is going to keep you topped up, buddy.
I mean, actually, now that you're saying this, I should actually probably get this because this is one of the things that I have heard from people. It's like physically it's demanding, which we've both done races, but like because in a grand tour you're not in a food hall with 1,000 people. Keeping healthy is like one of the biggest tips I've received from people. Is like you just need to make sure that you stay healthy. That's a huge part of this event, whether you're trying to win it or whether you're trying to finish it. Is a stomach bug, a cold, a little illness, like that can really run you down. So I'm leaving in a couple days, Mitch. I'm not sure if I have time, but if you can pack me some extra Athletic Greens, I will. I'll definitely. We can make a little smoothie every morning in our RV. Do some little recovery shots.
Well, we'll do, mate. Well, let's just talk about what we're talking about here, because I was thinking, okay, what is mountain biking? Yeah, sure, I've been out riding it, but I think in order to do the biggest, hardest race there is, you need to understand the full sport complete. And I mean, go back to the beginning. Where has mountain biking even come from? And when it came to that, I looked back and I found one of the godfathers of mountain biking, one of the initial guys, Ned Overend. He was the guy who won the first XC World Championships in Durango. He is one of the guys who pioneered the sport in the very beginning. He saw the evolution of the bikes. He saw that first specialized stunt jumper come about, ride it. Boz, do you have much to do with Ned? I know you ride a specialized as well. He's been riding one from the beginning. Did you know much about him starting in mountain biking yourself? BMXing. Were you aware of this early scene?
I mean, a little bit, yeah. I mean, I knew of Ned, I knew of, Tomac, all these kind of iconic mountain bike figures. And I actually got to spend some time with, Tinker Juarez last year. People who've been racing bikes like since, the late 80s, early 90s. And like for them to still, I think the wild thing is they're still riding. And I actually did like a little gravel fondo thing in 2019 and was like, pushing it up this climb, and one person hung with me before I flatted. And I was like, who is this guy? He was like an older gentleman, and turns out it was Ned. And I was like, afterwards, I was like, what the heck? He's like 60 something years old and he's still so fit and so good. And like, of course, like he probably would have, had I not flatted, he would have destroyed me on the downhill. But, it is crazy for those people. We look back to the 90s and yeah, the road bike has changed, but not nearly as much as the mountain bike. They were on rigid bikes. They had, very few gears, small tires, even you think about stuff like tubeless and whatnot, it's advanced so much over the last couple of years. The mountain bike that I'm going to be riding down at Cape Epic, the Epic Evo, it's as different from my first mountain bike as riding a road bike to a time trial bike. They're just so massively advanced and way more comfortable and like way more confidence boosting in a sense. I still see things that I'm trying to ride, and I still mentally on like my gravel bike or road bike, I'm like, oh, I can't roll up that. But then if you just try it, these new bikes, like they just go over things and you're like, oh, that was like, I hardly even felt that.
Well, that's what we get into with Ned. And the best part is we move on to the next step. And I thought, who could I speak to next? Okay, Ned's given us the whole background of where the sport's come from. But then I wanted to speak to the GOAT, the greatest of all time, Nino Schurter. And I know everyone out there has probably heard of his name or knows a bit more than I did about him when I spoke to him. This guy is the best in mountain biking, 10 times world champ. And we go into his results in the podcast. We sat down. It was actually an honor to be able to sit down with someone like that and ask the stupidest questions and learn a little bit more about the racing scene. And then we really wanted to speak to someone who's been in the scene from a young age as well, and in the scene right now, coming through it. And that was Hayley Batten. She's just coming through the scene now, hitting the top. She's at the peak level. She's been to Cape Epic as well, as Nino had. And I want to speak to her a little bit about the intricate racing stuff, like all the unwritten rules in the Peloton. And she was great to speak to. And I know you've crossed paths with her a little bit as well, Ian, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. She's been on my podcast a couple times, and we actually sponsor her with Wahoo, where I work. But she's clearly a phenomenal rider. And I feel like, when we kind of look back at the history of mountain biking, it was definitely kind of started as like a North American sport. A lot of Americans, Canadians were dominating, and then the sport kind of has moved over to Europe. And it's really cool to see, some of the younger athletes like herself, Chris Blevins as well, come to the fore and like be like, hey, we're back on top now. And she's still young. She's also an incredibly intelligent, she's like balancing going to school and racing at the same time. It's really cool to just see these athletes who have like, kind of they're perfecting what mountain biking is. And, hopefully one day both you and I get a chance to ride with her, because I would love to just I'm not going to even be able to follow her down a hill, but just like to see what someone like, her can do on a mountain bike.
And then lastly, I was speaking to Lachlan Morton, who's come from our world, the road world, and he's been in the mountain bike scene for the last couple of years. So I was like, mate, what are we in for? So he gives us a little insight to what to expect as a roadie doing mountain biking. It's a massive episode, Ian. We've spoken a lot about it. It's a long intro. I know everyone's hanging out for this episode. Guys, Ian and I are traveling over to South Africa in a couple of days. We're going to be over there at the Cape Epic. Let's try and learn a little bit about mountain biking before we go, Boz, and then we'll head over to South Africa.
Sounds like a plan, Mitch.
Guys, without further ado, sit back, strap yourself in. This is a long one, and enjoy. What is mountain biking? Well, when I was thinking about this, I had to go back to the beginning. I had to find out, where has this sport really even come from, mountain biking? For me, I just didn't really know it really existed, or the history of it, before I actually got into it myself. So I went right back to the beginning, and one of the names that stuck out to me was Ned Overend. I'm going to talk to him right now. He was the first cross-country world champion in 1990, but there was a lot that happened before that. Ned, welcome to the podcast. Let's get back to the history.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Let's go right back to the beginning. You can help me educate me, and also the audience a little bit about, because I think from what I understand, you came in a little bit later. Things were already starting to roll along. Back in the late 70s, I think, and I could be really wrong, there was a bike sort of movement going on where guys were sort of modifying these original cruisers into almost this bike that they were named the clunkers or something. How did this all come about? How did mountain biking, I guess, birth?
Well, I think that people were riding these clunkers, these paperboy bikes, right? These one-speed bikes with a little bit fatter tires in different areas off-road. I think they were doing it some in Crested Butte. There's areas in Colorado that were doing it. But what happened in Marin County, there was a group of guys that some of them were road racers, like Gary Fisher and Tom Ritchie. And they kind of discovered these clunker bikes, and they had a group of guys that would get together and ride them. There was this one downhill section called Repack, and they started having regular timed events racing down that. And so the birth of mountain biking was through this racing. This is kind of where it started. What was really interesting is that there was 4 guys in that group: Joe Breeze, Gary Fisher, Tom Ritchie, and Otis Guy. And these 4 guys, they're all tinkerers and builders. And those guys started all building their own bikes and, started out modifying like old Schwinn's. And then pretty soon these guys built their own frames and started making space for rear derailleurs and stuff like that, and adding rim brakes and stuff like that. The fact, it was kind of the perfect storm that this group of guys who started riding here and racing down Repack, and they called it Repack Downhill. They were using coaster brake bikes to begin with, right? So you would pedal backwards, like that was the old style coaster brake, they called it. And by the time they got to the bottom of this hill, that lost like a couple thousand feet in elevation, the rear hub got so hot that the bearing grease would burn off, and they needed to repack the bearings. So they call it the Repack Downhill.
Right. So I guess it really starts, because I was thinking about it then. Cyclocross has been around for a long time. Guys riding through paddocks on, road bikes or, town bikes essentially. But the biggest difference here was they were attempting things that were gnarly, steep downhills. Essentially, it birthed with a bit of downhill racing, isn't it?
Yeah. And the fact that they started on those fat flunker tires. They were 26-inch tires, but, some of them were, 2 inches wide already. And they didn't start out having tread. I think that kind of came later, because they were, like paperboy bikes, made to be more comfortable for riding around on the pavement. And these guys took them off-road. But just the fact that these guys were tinkerers and inventors, and so many of them, and they actually pushed each other, Tom Ritchie and Gary Fisher are very competitive with each other. Joe Breeze, he's a little more friendly and stuff like this. But this competition really drove the development of the mountain bike. They were really skilled artists, and they started racing. So the cross-country racing scene started out of this early thing with these guys. And these guys all had teams. Well, maybe not all of them, but at least Tom Ritchie and Gary Fisher both had very competitive early mountain bike teams where they were racing against each other. I actually started racing on the Schwinn team in 1984. It was the first time I started getting into the mountain bike race scene. And Mike Senior was Specialized. They had already had a team starting around 83. Tom Ritchie had a team, and Gary Fisher had a pretty well-established team as well.
To help me understand, these guys were sort of seen a little bit crazy. These guys were just ripping down these, the repack track or descent or whatever you want to call it, on these bikes that were not fit for that. What was the image of everyone, even you, hearing about this? Was it something clearly excited you? But what were people thinking about these guys at that point? Like, these guys are just nuts, or this is going to be awesome?
I think what they discovered, and it's the same thing that everybody discovers when they get on a mountain bike, is that it kind of makes you feel like a kid, right? You're riding a bike, off-road in the dirt in an upright, comfortable position, not like a road bike, right?
Exactly.
You're leaned over, and it's a lot harder on your butt, your shoulders, and your hands and everything. So it was a fun, friendly position. And, that's what Mike Senior discovered, and that he knew that it wasn't just a fad and that mountain bikes were here to stay. Because the feeling you get when you're out riding a cruiser-style mountain bike off-road. So I think that's what these guys discovered. They were a little nuts. They were competitive. If you look at the time sheets, I mean, these guys, they were crashing and they were really pushing the limits. And I've ridden down Repack. It is a sketchy downhill. It's not a single track, but it's rough, and it's got a lot of marbling on it. It's got off-camber turns, and it's high speed. So these guys were really skilled, and their times back then are hard to beat now on modern mountain bikes. Yeah, it's impressive how fast those guys were going.
What was the development then? Like, as you said, these guys were frame builders a little bit themselves, or just very crafty minded. Were able to adapt these cruisers into the clunkers. But, Specialized were one of the first to jump on, the first commercially produced mountain bike in 81. That development, to see actually, bigger bike brands grabbing hold of it. Tell me a little bit about that. When people said, yeah, this is going to happen, we need to jump on this, we need to get involved in mountain biking and develop this sport.
When the sport first started to grow, it was guys like Gary Fisher and Tom Ritchie making very small batch custom frame bikes. Otis Guy, Wilderness Trail Bikes with Steve Potts. So he was another early frame builder. So that was the only place you could really get these bikes. And then Mike Senior, who had been going to Europe to source Italian parts for U.S. dealers. And then he started making his own tire, and he was doing that in Taiwan. So he had these connections to Taiwan. He saw what was going on in the mountain bike world, and he hired a couple guys to help him design a mountain bike frame. And he took it to Taiwan, and he said, let's mass produce this, or mass produce, but let's build it on a bigger scale. And then the challenge was finding component manufacturers, because they didn't have the component manufacturers to do that. It was like TA cranks, and it was Magura motorcycle brake levers. So interesting stuff of how he had to cobble all these different parts together. And in the beginning, it was Suntour who had first developed the mountain bike shifters.
So these bikes you were seeing at these very sort of early events, if you want to call them that, they were just almost like these Frankenstein sort of bikes, people trying out different parts, whatever they could find and mold into a bike. As the bike sort of slowly found its shape and form, how long was it before people were like, cool, this is something that's going to happen? Because I even remember watching some early stuff, doing some research for this, and you saw like a guy like John Tomac riding down drop bars, So they were still going back and forth to the road and testing different things. It still went on for a little while before we see this bike we now call a mountain bike.
Tomac was an anomaly with those drop bar bikes. He started out on flat bar bikes. It's not like he came from the road. He actually picked up road racing after he had been mountain bike racing for several years. Right. And what he wanted to do was to race mountain bikes on his road position, because he never rode road bikes before he got on he was in BMX first, Then he went to mountain biking. He was successful in mountain biking, and then he discovered the road because he started training on the road to progress his mountain bike racing. But then he said, okay, I'm racing on the road. I want to have a similar position on these two things, two disciplines I'm racing. And he's one of the only guys who can race fast, successfully downhill in drop bar because he's such a phenomenal bike handler.
Well, the bike started to mold, like, was it around this specialized stunt jumper that things started to take their shape of what sort of the earliest versions of what we see today as a mountain bike?
Yes. The geometry has progressed all along and been changing all along the time. But at that time, it had a long wheelbase to make it more stable on the descents, made it kind of difficult for climbing because wheelbase was so long. Of course, they were rigid forks, but the forks were curved at the front and they had some flex built into them. These forks that they started designing for off-road use. They put a rear derailleur on it, and, at the time it was 5 speeds. And then they quickly discovered that they needed more than even 2 gears in the front. So the standard became a triple chainring in the front. And because the derailleurs were not capable of handling a lot of chain wrap, so they were not a lot of spring tension, and controlling your chain was a real issue in mountain bike racing and just off-road riding in the early years, because the chain would fly off or you'd have chain suck, and you can imagine trying to shift between 3 chain rings.
So actually you had to ride smooth just to protect your bike. Go fast, but smooth was fast.
Yeah, and you had to ride with some finesse, because if you didn't, not only would you throw your chain, but you would trash your bike. The bikes were much more fragile then. They had tubes in your tires. We were used to race about on a 2-inch tire. Literally, I would ride like 42 PSI in the front and 45 PSI in the rear, which is like rock hard, right? Because you had to fix your own flats in the race. There was no outside support. So, if you had a mechanical in the race, you had to fix your flat. And a lot of guys became quite quick, especially Tomac. He would get a lot of flats. And I took advantage of him getting a lot of flats because he was a super aggressive downhiller. That would catch up with him sometimes when he would puncture on the descents.
Well, let's talk about, you've spoken a little bit about it now, when you entered the scene and the racing around then, because as you said at the start, it was a bit more straight downhill and just discovering what you could do on a bike going down fast. But I feel like it morphed into a bit of a cross country, a bit of a race. Those were much longer races back when you were doing it in comparative to what we see now. If you can talk about those early races when you came in, what was it? Was there a lot of technical downhills, and was it more about the fitness? What sort of combination rider was it? What were you when you started?
Well, it's interesting. Even though it started in repack, it quickly moved away from downhill. Really, the whole focus on the early years of the sport were in cross countries. These series of races that started up in California, Southern California, Northern California, and things like the Rock Hopper race. And a lot of them were single loop cross countries. And, they'd generally be like 2.5 hours, like they call it the Whiskey Town downhill, but it's actually one large loop with a lot of climbing. There wasn't a lot of climbing. There was a lot of fire roads, but they would always try and find some technical single track sections to throw in there. So it's hard to categorize these races as, being like wide open fire road or single track, because there was a little bit of everything depending on the courses. Like promoters today, promoters would pride themselves in creating difficult courses. And several of the courses were ski area race courses where you would climb up the entire ski area every lap, and then you'd have a long descent coming down it. But those tend to be more fitness-focused courses.
Talk about those bikes back then, racing them in the beginning, because I've seen a bit of an evolution, well, a lot of evolution. You guys were all about riding narrow bars. As a roadie, that's something we want. Narrow bars, they're more aerodynamic. You don't need that big sort of leverage or, ability to sort of balance, I guess you'd call it. The forks were different. The wheel size was different. In the beginning, what was the theory around some of those setups, these really long stems on the bike? Was it just following the theme of road?
It was similar in that Gary Fisher and Tom Ritchie were both road racers before they got involved in building mountain bikes. So when they thought about a competitive mountain bike, it was something that had a more aerodynamic posture, right? I mean, it was low in the front and long stem. I think the reasoning behind us cutting our bars down to so narrow was that, I picture myself when I'm climbing, I want to be pulling directly back, kind of in line with my shoulders for like the most efficient climbing position, similar to a road bike would be, right? You're climbing,
Sure.
kind of pulling straight back, as opposed to like having your hands out wide, pulling in from an angle. So I used to cut my bars down like shoulder width. I don't know why it didn't occur to us that is so unstable on the descent to have narrow bars like that. When you descend on an old bike like that these days, it's frightening in comparison to the a little bit wider handlebars. But everything else makes it frightening too. We had steep head angles, and which made the bikes very twitchy. They could turn very quickly on slow climbing turns. They were good for that, but
That's about it.
steep head angles, a lot of weight on the front, narrow handlebars, and it really made for some pretty scary descending bikes.
You guys were very, very technically good, and it sort of felt like the guys who are stepping into this scene, you had to be. I guess, look, the mountain bikes now lend to all abilities. I think that's the beautiful thing about it. I'm even able to ride some pretty hard trails, but just not at the speed of the good guys. People less skillful than me can also do the same thing. Back then, it sounds like if you didn't have a certain level of skill, you really couldn't go out on the trails on those bikes, could you?
Yeah, well, you could cruise around on them, but trying to race with some of these guys who are really technically good was the average person, like a road rider coming over would, and it happened quite often. Road racers would see how big mountain bike was growing. There was salaries in it, and they'd come over and say, I'm going to try mountain bike, and I'm going to, because I've got all this fitness, I'm going to be a mountain bike racer. And it was eye-opening to them to see that it took a while before they could figure out the descending skills, if they ever figured it out.
Let's talk about the first World Championships ever in 1990 in Durango. How did this all come about, and what was the hype around this? Finally, we've got the World Championships. Well, not finally. I guess it sort of was within the 10 years or 15 years of the sport really coming about. Did it really feel like that was the natural next step? You really need to have the Worlds, and what was that atmosphere around the World Championships?
Mountain biking had, in the late 80s, was growing really quickly. It was getting a lot of attention. And starting in 1987, Mammoth, which was the biggest race in the U.S. and a big prize list, called itself the World Championships. 87, 88, and 89, the Mammoth race called themselves the World Championships. At the same time, there was a World Championships in Europe. Jean-Claude Garreau, who owned Winning Magazine, was putting on, the first one was in Villard-des-Lans in the Vercors in the French Alps. It was a big event. It was one of the biggest events in Europe. And then the next one was in Switzerland, and I think the third one was in Germany. These were big races. They had a lot of prestige to them. I won several of those early World Championships. Actually, I won 4 World Championships before the 1990 World.
Right.
Really, it needed to be unified, right? Because you only want to have one World Championships, and the UCI recognized mountain biking starting in 1990, so it gave it a lot more credibility. And here, you had specific national teams that qualified, national teams of juniors and men's teams, women's teams, and everything. So it gave it a lot of credibility. It made it easier for the media to cover it, because it wasn't so confusing with several world championships. But there was a lot of pressure on me because I'd already won 4 of them, and now we have the first real world championships. Well, I thought I was winning real world championships. So I really wanted to win that first one, and it was a huge relief when I actually did manage to get that title. Yeah, and that then enabled, starting in 91, there was a mountain bike World Cup. So it helped the sport progress. And that's one reason that in 1996, it was actually in the Olympics, because being a UCI official sport starting in 1990, they're part of the UCI and the USOC, the Olympic Committee. So that enabled them to get into the Olympics fairly soon for a pretty young sport.
Very young sport, and as you were saying then, it was growing so fast, and it was, I guess, attracting all different types of people. Like, as you already mentioned before, some roadies were coming in, some BMXers maybe were doing it. What was the scene really like in the beginning? What types of people were there? Because this is something that I've been really blown away with. It's very different to road, and I mean that in a positive way. It's a very inviting scene, something that I noticed straight off from the bat, and I haven't been going to any high-level races, but that's what I love about it. All levels come together, you get on the trails, and there's just a really nice medium discussion about how you went out there. What was it like in the beginning? Has it always been like that, or is it something that's just developed over the years?
Because it was considered so hard, and it was harder on those bikes, especially when you get into technical terrain. My impression of the sport is that, yes, you're competing against the other people out there, but you're also, all of you are kind of competing against the course itself, right? So there's this sense of accomplishment because you're riding these bikes off-road, climbing up a ski area and descending down a ski area in the dirt on trails. And it seems kind of wild and dangerous. And that creates a camaraderie amongst the people that, okay, we've all achieved this together, so it's amazing what we're doing, and we're having fun, and it's exciting, right? So at the same time, you're racing, but there's a sense of accomplishment just for doing what you're doing because it was considered so rad at the time, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah, totally. It was just, you made it, like, I can't believe it, it's developing, and what can we do? How can we make it better? How can we make these bikes better? What about these races now that we see? They've been around for a long time. Cape Epic, the Australian edition, the Crocodile Trophy, where quite a lot of road racers did that, road riders did that. These longer distance races, what do you think about these now? Because it seems like it's really come back to what it started out to be. A mixture of sort of fire trail and a bit of single trail, but actually spending a bit more time on the mountain bike. Is that something that you like to see, or you're a bit more interested in where XC has gone now in terms of that really fast, intense stuff?
Mountain biking developed, so it starts with cross-country, and those early cross-country races, we should talk about it. They were not what cross-country is now. Now cross-country, mandated by the UCI, has to be very, within a handful of minutes of an hour and a half. So that makes for a very punchy, fast race, almost like cyclocross, right? Those guys are sprinting off the line. There's a lot of attacks. It's very aggressive because they're only going an hour and a half, and they can go fast for an hour and a half. Back in the day, we were doing, wouldn't be unusual to have a 2.5 hour cross country, even as many as 3 hours. And we're climbing up a ski area, the entire distance of a ski area hill, maybe 3 times. So it would require more pacing. Back, you're doing a 3 hour race. But then mountain biking, it started to branch off into all these different disciplines. I think Cape Epic and those long stage races kind of grew out of this growth of 24-hour racing. It seemed like it did anyway. There was actually some early examples of stage racing, even back in the late 80s. We had a long race up in Whistler that was like 5 days, and Vail had a Race the Rockies race that was almost a week long and stuff. But the stages weren't as long as they are at the Cape Epic. I think the mix is great. I mean, I think there's people that it's not my preferred method of racing because I tend to like shorter, faster races. But I think it's great because people love, if you follow the story of the Cape Epic, it's amazing. The emotion in those people and the scenery that they're seeing, and they're all camping in one spot, and the camaraderie and the competitiveness of it and the dynamic of the 2-person racing style, is really, and Australia has a lot of 2-person races, right? Team style races, I've noticed. Yeah. And it's also popular with several of the other races that they do in South Africa. It's less common in the US where you have paired racing.
Finally, I want you to just give me a little piece of advice because roadies coming across the mountain biking. You know it from right in the beginning. You've seen it throughout your whole career, but you've also seen the evolution of mountain bikes, and where the mountain bikes are at now. Arguably, they're easier to ride. They're better suited for, novices like me. I'm going into what is one of the hardest, if not the hardest stage race, mountain bike race. I know it's hard to give me some kind of advice because you probably don't have enough time. What am I getting myself set up for here? What is some advice I can take on board from you?
What comes to mind for anybody doing an event that long, riding efficiently. And that's what I try and think of whenever I'm riding and pacing myself for a long endurance event. And this is obviously each stage is long and the week is long. And it's difficult, and there's some very technical sections. So I think being efficient, you not only have to think, okay, I need to be efficient throughout the entire 7 days. I need to be efficient throughout each individual stage as well to kind of make it to the end of the stage. So what's part of being efficient is, sure, you want to, pace yourself on the climbs and the fitness aspect you're very familiar with, but being efficient on the descent, that's about relaxing and saving energy, consciously relaxing, because that's your time to recover. If you're not really taking advantage of the recovery on the descents, the climbing sections are going to be that much harder.
Well, one company I'm really familiar with is Wahoo Fitness. It's a company that I was working with when I was professional. It's something that I've taken over to my afterlife outside of the pro ranks, is the Wahoo Element Roam bike computer, something I can't live without on my bike because I need to see where I'm going. It's a powerful and accurate GPS cycling computer. It's got many great features, one of them being the Summit segment feature. Boz, tell me about this. You're very familiar with Wahoo. What does this feature do? It's something, I don't know. I love it and I also hate it at the same time. It's one of those great things about the Wahoo Roam bike computer.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm similar right there with you, Mitch. It's a feature essentially that when you get to a climb, it tells you, cool, here's where you're at the climb. Here's what the gradient looks like. Here's what, it's all color coded. Here's what's coming up. And also gives you what's your estimated time to the top. And that's probably where you start to get frustrated. If you're feeling good and you're like, sweet, it's only like 4 minutes to the top. You're on a long climb and it's like, hey, it's like you still got 25 minutes to go and you're slowing down. So it's going to then say, hey, now it's actually going to be 26 minutes, 27 minutes. And that's where it gets frustrating, even though you know that you're getting closer, but sometimes your speed drops. But it is a super beneficial tool when you're especially riding roads and climbs that you don't oftentimes ride, at home.
I think it's going to be great. When we go to Cape Epic, a lot of roads we don't know. We're just going to load up our track in there. We're going to be able to see how many climbs we've got to go. How long are these on these climbs left? I'll be following your wheels, suffering away and knowing, okay, 2 minutes, that's all I got to do. 2 minutes more at this pace, Boz. Don't go any faster. One of the other great things I'm loving about it is the Outdoor Systems workout, where via the Wahoo Systems workout app, you're able to actually take your workout, load it into your computer, and follow your workout out on the road outside. Boz, have you used this actually? And what do you like about this?
I have, yeah. If anyone follows me on Strava, they see that I do a lot of system workouts inside, but obviously as the temperatures, start to warm up here in New England, I start to ride outside, and then I can simply just take the workouts that I like doing indoors on the kicker, put them on my Element Roam or Bolt, and then do those same workouts outside on the open road. So you get all the graphs at the bottom. You get to see when the rest period is, when the interval period is, and really kind of a seamless way for me to go from winter training indoors to riding outside on the road.
Well guys, let's get back to this episode and find out a little bit more about mountain biking. Well, guys, I'm trying to learn a bit more about mountain biking, and I thought, why not learn from the absolute best? And I mean the GOAT, the greatest of all time, in my opinion, is Nino Schurter. He is 10 times XC cross-country world champion. He's won it twice in Australia, 2009 in Canberra, 2017 in Cairns. He's 8 times World Cup title holder, equal with Julian Absalon, who's also arguably one of the greatest as well. 2016, he got the Olympic gold medal as well. 2 times Cape Epic winner. He's been doing mountain bikes since he was 7 years old, 17 years as a professional in mountain biking, 19 years riding Scott bikes. He hasn't got sick of those bikes in all those years. Nino, are you going to be able to, enlighten me on what this world is like? Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on board.
Awesome to talk with you.
Let's start something that I'm a little bit more familiar with, the road. And you came across and dabbled in the road. We actually were teammates for a little bit. on Orica Green Edge.
Yeah, for a little bit, yeah.
We never got to race with each other. That's not uncommon in a World Tour team. Sometimes you don't race with guys. You got to race, if I'm not wrong, Tour of Romandy, Tour of Swiss. At that point were, and still are, one of the biggest, if not the biggest guy in mountain biking. And you came across to the road and sort of were just more or less another guy in the peloton. What was that little feeling like, coming in feeling like what it was like being on the road in the World Tour?
I started with mountain biking from the beginning as a kid. I always did mountain bike racing, but for sure, like there was always the road and that it's a bit bigger, a bit more attention. And I wanted also to see once if that could be something for myself. And I got this great opportunity to race for that season or for those two races with Orica Green Edge, because we were both on Scott bikes and Orica Green Edge was those days on Scott bikes. So I got this opportunity and it was actually awesome for me to experience that once, to see what's racing on the road. It's a different world. Mountain biking is a bit different lifestyle than road. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was awesome to race.
What about because in mountain biking, you know who you are. You obviously, your competitors. You've built up this reputation and I know this in the World Tour as well. Once new guys come in, you're sort of like, hey, mate, you need to earn your stripes. You don't come and ride in front of me. You don't do this. You sort of work your way up the rungs. And suddenly you were in this peloton. What did you feel like in the professional peloton? You actually have your own level. You were the best in your own field in mountain biking, and you come across the road. Did you feel like an amateur again, or was it like, no, I feel pretty good here?
Yeah, I definitely had to earn, or I got a bit of some situations where I could feel I'm not just welcomed. I need to earn first my place here. But then also, like, I got a lot of respect from a lot of riders, and that was actually nice to see also that I was able to do this. And now it changed even more. It's like you have more riders that doing a bit of everything. When you see Father Pool or Pitcock, I think now mountain bike also got a bit a higher reputation in the road field. But back then I was one of the only ones coming from mountain biking over to the road.
What do you think of these guys? You've just mentioned them, Pitcock, Van der Poel, these guys who are jumping across during the season and sort of doing what you did the other way, coming into your world. You guys race week in, week out, and then suddenly these guys come in and mix it up, stir the pot. Because it seems like they've got a pretty good ability and they're at the front end as well. So they're not just, shit kickers at the back. They're mixing it up. But you guys have got a certain way the race goes. Do you mind the road guys coming in doing this, or does it sort of mess things up a little bit?
No, it's great that those two guys, I think it's two really special athletes. I think some of the only ones to do this, jump one discipline to the next. I think it's not something that everybody can do. I think that's two really great talents in cycling. It also brings more attention to all disciplines. I can remember when Van der Poel came the first years and he tried, and I was so motivated just to get him because he wasn't one.
Yeah, totally.
So at the beginning, when he made slowly his way to the strong, that then finally was there. I was like, I can remember Worlds back home in Lenzerheide 2018. I was like, I just want to make sure he's not going to win.
This is our word. You can't come here and take it off us. Exactly.
Both earned their position, and for me, they are both also mountain bikers. It's great to have them.
Well, tell me about racing now, and I want to go right back to the beginning. Tell me how it's changed over the years, because you've been racing. You've turned professional in 2007, and I get the feeling, and not knowing much about mountain biking, I get the feeling it's really changed a lot. Certainly the technology's changed. So I feel like the courses have maybe got a little bit more technical. Maybe the racing's got a bit shorter to, because Red Bull's been involved a few years ago. They want it to be on TV. And so that's, as we know, everyone wants something short, fast, exciting. How's the racing developed over those years since you've been in the peloton? Because you're at this really iconic period. You came after the pioneers of mountain biking, but you've taken the sport to where it is today. You've seen that massive growth of mountain biking.
Yeah, earlier I'm racing since I'm 7 years old, and I saw quite a development in the sport. Look back, like, let's see, Worlds 2009 in Canberra. The whole bike changed quite a lot. We always were racing on hardtails with narrow handlebars. 26-inch wheels like tires, and now the bike looks already quite different. But also the courses and the whole race changed dramatically, I would say. Now we are racing on short loops between 4 and 4.5 K long. Max race is now, duration is about 1.5 hours. Back then I had junior races that were already 2.5 hours. So it's like, it changed quite a bit, and you had to change also as an athlete quite a bit. So you need to be much more powerful. It's not all about endurance. You need to have great peak powers. Then also like now coming in, since a few years, we have now also short track racing. Well, it's always the first race on the weekend is the short track races, where you decide the start position for the main event. That's quite crucial that you have a good start position, being just flat out. And a few hundred meters, it's mostly going in onto single track where it's difficult to overtake. So, and that's 20 minutes flat out on a quite a simple course. So that requires even more to be really a powerful rider to get a good result in the 20 minute. It's almost like a criterion where I am also struggling the most now as getting one of the older riders, like being so
explosive and fresh. You know, it's what about the guys, like, you know, you being there, and this is something I struggled with as I got to the end of my career, that things were changing in the World Tour. The younger riders, the racing was changing, the style of racing. You know, I was one of the guys, you know, it's not as good as when I was racing back in the day, you know, type thing. As it developed and drastically has changed in mountain biking, more so than road cycling, as you spoke about, the races were much longer. Now they're getting much more technical. And, you know, I was watching the Tokyo Olympics. I thought that course was quite crazy. But I think a lot of the courses are getting very technical right now because the bikes are dual suspension, all this. Was there an upcry from the older guys going, hey, what's going on here? We're not racing downhill. We're supposed to be racing, you know, cross country. Or was it more like, yeah, this is great. This is more mountain biking?
We can't make everybody happy, I think so. There's always people that are complaining about this track or whatever, or about this new rule. It had to change a few things to make the sport more attractive. We have now a product that works really well, and that we also, like, all the riders can feel, or the teams can feel, that it's like a nice development. When I started World Cup racing, couldn't watch the races. And you actually had, after the race, you had to tell what happened in the World Cup race. And now we have a great product.
Yeah.
You know, it even gets bigger now. As a rider, you also had to develop through this time. You had to change yourselves quite a bit. But, you know, back then, sometimes races were 3 hours with climbs, with sometimes 15 minutes climbs. And now the longest climb on the cross-country track is probably 2 minutes.
Yeah, right.
So it changed. Having all those technical obstacles or technical downhills, you also need to be much more powerful also in upper body. It's not a completely endurance sport anymore. It's a challenge for athletes to just keep up with the sport and try to be up there. And young riders, for sure, just seeing this or just started with this, it's probably a different way how they approach the sport now as I did.
That's the thing with mountain biking that I'm understanding now. You know, I'm not saying road riding is no skills involved, but, you know, hell of a lot less skillful than, say, mountain biking. And it's that combination. It's the combination of having a big engine, but it's not all about how big your engine is. You've got to have the skill, because I found out very, very harshly when I did my first mountain bike race. I pinned it up the first climb. It was a road climb. I was like, great, I'm with the front guys. All of a sudden, everyone was coming past me on the single track. And I was like, what? Am I not going hard? What's going on here? I was at threshold, but I just couldn't keep the speed. And I understood at that moment that, you know, the technical skill was a massive part of it. It wasn't just how strong I was. So you've got to adapt. What you're saying, and I love hearing this, is that a lot of guys, you know, maybe that suited them. They were big engines maybe back in the old days, but they weren't as skillful. I don't know. I could be wrong saying this, but now you had to adapt and bring your skills up to a level for this new courses, or is that something that happened, or were they still very technical courses in the beginning?
They changed dramatically. So today you need to have really good skills, technically good skills, to be able to race at the front. It's not just about to manage to get through. It's like also to be able to ride economic, you know, like not to lose too much power. You need to be able to rest in those technical situations. even if you have a big engine and you're struggling with all those technical bits, you probably will not be able to push the night hard up the hill when it's easy. And really, those days, if you don't bring the technical skills, you probably you don't have a chance anymore, because you just use too much power through all those technical parts of the course. Most teams all have a technical trainer that train really a lot. It's not that you can decide a race, but you lose a race in like technical parts of the course. There's no way, if you want to do well, there's no way to take a beeline anymore. So you need to actually develop, and I think that's all about mountain biking, and like you need to be a really complete rider, It's a bit different on the road. I think there's some chances for right now, like one stage is for a climber, one stage is for a sprinter. But in mountain biking, if you're just a great climber, you will make it. If you're just a great sprinter, you will not do it. You need to be complete. And I think that's all about mountain biking now even more. You have your technical skill, you need to have your engine, you need to have your peak powers. It's like, you don't need to be the best in climbing, you don't need to be the best in sprinting, but you need to be good everywhere.
What are you ever scared or intimidated by the, like in the race, or when you realize, okay, I've got to lift this level, like this is stuff that I'm intimidated by, these jumps, these doubles, these descent, but I've got to overcome that? Or you're past all that now, there's nothing that makes you scared, I guess,
This, I actually quite enjoyed this development in sport, because I was always one of the more technical riders, so I enjoy actually when it's a bit difficult. When I was a kid, I also did a bit of downhill racing. My family was quite into downhill racing, so my brother raced downhill, and my father was for a while downhill national coach. So I always enjoyed this part of cross-country racing. So when I saw a track getting more difficult, or I saw it's super technical, I was always happy, and I was like, that's going to be a race for me. So
can you take me inside a race now? Because I've never done a XC race. I've only done sort of a stage race mountain bike. Or a marathon, so a 100K one. So that suits me a bit more. It's a bit more relaxed at the start. And I was on the start line of my first marathon, I thought it was going to be like an XC race. Everyone was going to sprint off, and I was so nervous. But actually we took off and we were chatting for the first minute or two. Take me inside the start line. Like, what's going on then, and sprint for the shoot, I guess, or the single track? Is it aggressive out there? Is there some kind of respect between you guys? Is there some kind of unwritten rules like the road, where when you're in front and you're going slow, you let a guy around, or you're like, no, bad luck, mate, you want to get around me, get around on the outside?
There's for sure a lot of respect in between the top riders, but if you're not in the top 20, it gets quite aggressive. But in the top 20, I would say there's big respect for each other. But then further back it goes, it's more aggressive it gets. It's probably similar like on the road. Cross-country racing is flat out from the start. Mostly in the first minute, you're on your max, what you can bring in a minute. And then after like the first 10 minutes, you find a bit your position. Hopefully you're happy where you ended up. If not, you need to start to move up. Racing on a single track, just sometimes it gets wide where you can pass. Most important thing is to ride economic, to save energy, even if it's just a bit of drafting for a while. Get to the right position, get smoothly through technical bits where you don't use too much energy. Then hopefully end up where you want.
So there is actually drafting, because that's the question I was going to ask you is, in my opinion, it'd be nice to be in the front, because I'd be able to see the track. I can see where I'm going, I can see what I've got coming, but would you prefer to be following someone, follow their line? They could do a bad line maybe, Is that a position that you like to sit behind someone because you get an aerodynamic advantage? Or would you prefer, if I can get out front, I prefer to be out front on my own?
For sure, drafting is not as a big thing as on the road, because we're a bit slower on the trails. We are mostly between 20, 40 Ks an hour. It's still, there is drafts. Even if you go through a single track, you feel a draft behind someone. So, but you also don't want to end up in 10th position, because as soon as you get to a turn or so, it can block you up, and if you're at 10th position,
the harmonica effect, yeah.
you're going fast, slow, and you're ending up blowing up because you always need to sprint out of the corner and then you need to wait again. So you want to be in a good position. So what I like most is riding at second position. You know, you have a little draft. You see everything, you have everything under control. So then hopefully in the end, be able to be the strongest.
What about dropper posts? You know, this is something that I rode firstly without one, and so I didn't know anything different. And then someone said, how could you even possibly ride with the dropper post and, you know, without one? And then I got one and I feel like I'm using it even on the flat now. I love it. You know, I've got more control. You guys, you know, some guys are choosing not to use dropper posts just because it's a bit of extra weight. I can't even understand that, you know, some of the stuff you go down. These sort of little technical things, is it really that finicky in the top end that you're going, one track I put a dropper post on, one track I don't? You know, like you said, the tyre width, the tyre pressure, it really is the minute details, isn't it?
There's a lot of details, but like with dropper posts, I think now everybody's using it. So there were years where some guys, or I also myself, I was running a long time without dropper posts because I wanted to save the weight, and I was like, if this being a bit more technical rider, I was able to keep up with the boys having a dropper post. But now, you know, it's not about just being able to do it. It's also about how you do it. Like, that's again how economic you can race. If you can lower your seat, you just can ride easier through this section and you save some energy for later. But I think a good example is, maybe you guys still know, in Tokyo, where Van der Poel went over this jungle and crashed. He didn't have a dropper post on. In the end, it can cause us also crashes. For a long time, like, the weight on the bike was a big thing because it's also coming a bit from the road, you know, like if you climb long, it's crucial to be light. But mountain biking is like, the performance of the bike is the main thing. And then for sure the weight is also important, but it's not the most important thing. You need to have a bike that works well. That's as well, like, you need to have great suspension. You need to have good tires.
And tell me a little bit about, if you can, the psychology out there. You know, is there some mind games going on between the guys, you know, that, you know, I don't know, maybe I've seen it where there's two different styles of track, and, you know, one way's a little bit longer but it's easier, and one way's more technical and, you know, harder. And just being able to do that time and time again, just sort of letting the other guys know, hey, I just did the hard bit, you just took the easy route. Or I don't know, you know, there's sitting on someone's wheel, or even at the start, just, yeah, give me inside. What are the little sort of psychological games going on out there? Is that sort of stuff happening?
For sure. Like, I think that's in every sport, is like the mind game is as important as the rest. I think also for yourself to have self-confidence. And I think that's a big part of top end sport in the end, to be able to at least to what you're capable to actually to perform what you're capable. It starts before the race. Who looks good? Who looks confident? And also sometimes in practice, you know, who takes the hands. When there's practice, there's always guys on the track taking videos, and then you see, wow, this guy has good line. He looks super fast, and he takes this section so smooth. It starts already there. So as long as you're having in control of the game and to have the self-confidence in the end as well to win.
I think for you, like, it's clear, like, if you just want to look at your Palmares and remember what I introduced you as, you know, 10 times world champion, there's just so many other races I'm not mentioning, you know, 8 times World Cup title holder, just to be able to have that consistency, to be able to redo the same format. You know, it's not just having little spikes and, you know, massive downfalls. It's being able to be that consistent guy, and understanding what makes it work for you. I'm making it sound a hell of a lot easier than it is, but that is a formula I can imagine that you've had to work with over the years through different mentors, through different, either whether you've reached out to professional psychologists or even just yourself, figuring out what works for you. And I find that so interesting, especially talking, you know, with champions like yourself, because I have that own individual battle with myself about just trying to do my simple job on the road as a pro, let alone trying to win a world championship year after year. Is that something that you pride yourself on, being able to, like you said, have control and figure out what's going in your head to be able to do that performance year after year?
How your mindset, I think it's almost the most important thing to be successful. For sure, you need to do your work, your training and everything. But if your mindset is wrong, you can be in the best shape of your life and you will not make it. It's like you need to get in this position where you feel comfortable, where you have this self-confidence. That's probably one of the main reasons why I was so successful through the past years. I had great people around me helping me to get in this state, to slowly build me up, to get the self-confidence, to get the right mindset, to be ready when it really counts. That requires a good planning, a long time planning as well, like to get everything right. And I think that's a lot of riders. Maybe I'm not the strongest rider, but I can perform what I'm capable. I'm able to unlock what I can. And I think a lot of riders, they could do much better, but on day X, something is missing, or something is like not 100% right. And that's I think it's a big key in professional sport, to have the right mindset.
It's not only just up for yourself to figure out, you've got to use those people around you. It sounds like you've got a great team around you. I want to ask you lastly about a different style of racing. And this is where I feel like two different styles of two worlds meet. I'm talking about Cape Epic, the Epic series. You've done Swiss Epic. You've also done Cape Epic. You've won Cape Epic twice. You've won Swiss Epic once, I saw. But I saw, and I could be wrong, you've never done the Crocodile Trophy. Mate, the biggest one there is. Tell me about these races and how they differ from what we were just talking about.
All these epics or this marathon racing is completely different what we mountain biker are used to. Yeah, we have one-day events. Now with the World Cup having a short track race, it changed a bit. It also almost feels a bit like a short stage race. Like a Cape Epic, I think it's the hardest of all those races. It's like 8 days in a row. That's something totally different for us, cross-country race. And also distance is much longer. Some of those stages are up to 5 hours. You need to race as a team, like all those races, you race as a couple. You need to stay together for the entire race. That's also a bit like cross-country racing. You are like a single sport, you are responsible for yourself, and all of a sudden you race as a team, and you need to work well together. But I really enjoy it. Enjoying those races. It's different. It's a bit closer than to road racing.
Good.
Those Swiss Epic or the Cape Epic were those races I won. I also had quite a benefit from this time. I raced with Orica Green Edge.
Wow. Really?
It's like, I realized that's like in those stage races on the road, it's like, even if it's easy, you need to try to save every pedal stroke, because you're probably going to need it later, to be as economic as possible through the race, riding. If there's a turn, to be just as smooth as possible around this turn, that maybe save 2-3 pedal strokes afterwards. And that gets really crucial in those races. What's the difference then? It's like, to the road racing, it's even harder than on the road, because it's like, if you're on a gravel road or then a trail, you always never have really this time where you can just float in the field.
Hayley Batten, you've got to tell me a little bit about what it's like to actually race in the Peloton, I'm going to call it, because you've grown up racing mountain bikes, from the age of 9, from what I understand, in Park City, where, from what I hear, is there's just endless trails. You've just known mountain biking. The first question I've really got to ask is all those little things you learn over the years, that's things that I've got to be aware of, like, what do I really need to be prepared for? In mountain biking, is there sort of like unwritten rules? I'm sure there are, because in road cycling, in the Peloton, even in bunch rides, people are like, well, how come you're doing that? How come you're doing this? You're like, hey, of course, we don't do that. What have I got to be prepared for? What are those things? It's going to be hard for you to think about it, because they're going to come naturally to you.
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for having me on. I love that you're jumping into our crazy sport we call mountain biking. I think it's going to be awesome. I hope you enjoy it. But gosh, I think that's such a funny question too, because I feel like whenever I go on a road group ride or something, that's kind of the element that I'm so not used to. And it's like, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong? I'm always worried about, am I on the wrong wheel, or, am I crash or something like that. But yeah, gosh, mountain biking, you know what? That's a hard question to answer too, because you're right. I've been doing it for so long, and some of it like just comes so naturally. And I think some of the, maybe just the key parts for you will just be, I think, becoming one with your bike, you know, and I think you already do that on the road bike, you know, and I think it's just another element of that on the mountain bike. And I think just the technical aspects, but also, I mean, I think especially with something like, you know, the Cape Epic, I think it's you'll bring so much of those tactics and your awareness of when, you know, to make your moves. And I think in a cross country race, it's a bit different because it is almost like we go all out for an hour and a half. And there are very few sports that are an endurance event, but also full on, like it's relentless, you know, it's almost not an endurance event because it's just so high paced the whole time. But yeah, I'd say the keys are just becoming one with your machine, you know, and learning the equipment, making right tire choices, you know, being aware of what the conditions are to make those choices for your equipment. And then also just having a good time. I think that's what the vibe is for mountain biking, is it's all about the stoke and just being out there in nature and on the cool trails. And I think that's probably what's the most fun about it.
I'm already hearing the lingo. I've got to get some of these words down, Pat. Like it's a completely different language. I'm picking up on a couple of things there, so I'm going to have to get a vocabulary sort of lesson as well. That's actually funny. Of all the
my coach is from the roadside, and when she first started coaching me as well, she was like, just always would make fun of me. Oh, stick and stoked and gnarly. And she just, she's slowly picking up on it too. But she sends me videos all the time about comparing road lingo to mountain bike, and it's different, but it's also very much, it's similar in many ways as well.
Tell me about the little things now. Since we're talking about that little funny stuff, what about long finger gloves? They're a must.
Actually, yes. I think if you wear short finger gloves, people might make fun of you. It is like just part of that. It's one of those little things. Everybody does it.
What about peaks on helmets?
Wait,
don't do that.
Oh,
have people lost the peaks now?
A peak?
Yeah.
A peak?
A peak, yeah.
Yeah, no visors either. For cross country racing, when I'm on my trail bike or enduro bike or wearing baggies, then visors allowed.
You said before, you know, cross countries, your first cross country World Cup appearance, you actually podiumed. That's quite phenomenal, and I get the feeling that had to do with you growing up with mountain biking and sort of being second nature to you. Talk to me about the start, how important that is, because from visually watching it in the race, it looks like you guys go out of the blocks and empty the tank, everything you've got right then and there, because if you're not into that single track in a good position, it could be over. Am I wrong, or is that exactly how it goes?
Spot on, and it's actually crazy. I've missed my pedal so many times in races, and it's been something I've focused on a lot, because I mean, if you think about like a cross country pedal, it's tiny, right? And you've only got two sides on it, and you really can't miss it. It's like the lights go, the lights go from red to green, and you have to click in instantly and be full power on the pedals into that single track. And it's a tricky element, and it's one of those tiny little skills that I spend a lot of time practicing, because it is so key to a cross country race.
Clicking in at the start and just being on that pedal and just going straight away.
You're at standstill, right? So you've got one foot in, like any bike ride. Yeah. And you basically have to get that pedal in, shoot to the pedal, clicked in as fast as possible, and then like stomp on it. Yeah, it's crazy.
And I guess it's a no-no to hang on to the side of the fence if you're on the side.
Yeah,
there.
no track standing, no floating on the wall, no cheating.
What about when you're out on the track? Like, is it sort of viewed as like, you've got no skills if you have to dab your foot down or even run up a sector or even walk down a sector? I'm assuming you never do that in a XC race. But what's the sort of funny sort of in the bunch sort of look on when you have to unclip or when you have to actually resort to walking? You're like, oh, did you see that girl? She had to walk up that climb. No chance.
I'd say it's a little bit of both. Like sometimes the conditions are so extreme that you have to just get off and run something as fast as possible. And it is interesting. Sometimes it's actually faster. So I remember there was a race in France a couple years ago where the conditions were so bad that I just would hop off and run around like the smallest part of the corner over these rock gardens as fast as possible instead of like riding over them, because I was just faster. And I think at the end of the day, it's not all about fitness and skill. It's just speed, right? It's whoever does the race as fast as possible, and I think that's the most important part. But for sure, like if you're not riding features or you're taking the B line, right, which is, the A lines are technical line, and the B lines that go around are the chicken line maybe. It's definitely part of cross country. for sure, and like trying to have the skills. But no, that's definitely part of it. And yeah, if you're hitting the jumps and riding the technical lines, it's definitely adds the cool aspect to our sport, I guess.
What about when it does get wet and slippery and stuff? What's the tactic there? Do you want to sort of, hang back, let them all sort of crash in front of you and you ride through, as everyone's cleared out of the way, or just go for it, get in front, let them make the mistake?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's a bit of both for sure. I mean, for me, like we just had a race in Spain, 2 weekends ago, and yeah, that was my tactic. It was muddy out there, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go fast from the gun and try and get away from everybody, because when people crash in front of you, it definitely slows you down, and I'd rather make those mistakes on my own and kind of be able to hop back up and continue my lead than get caught in a crash or stuck behind somebody. And I spent a lot of the winter and fall in Squamish, BC in Canada, so it gets really muddy there, and like there's a lot of rain, and so I find that that's definitely conditions that I feel comfortable in, I guess, and I spend a lot of time. So I use that to my advantage often. And sometimes if people are looking at the forecast and rain's on the way, they're stressing, and I'm honestly like, pray it rains. Like that's something I get really excited about. So the more unpredictable, that's something I love about cross country.
Well, what makes you even excited about the rain? Is it the fact that you've got better control than others on, say, slippery surfaces, or you like the mud? It's actually easier to ride in. It's got more grip. I don't know. I'm trying to think about what I could possibly like about going down a rock garden that's wet, or over wet routes where I'm out of control. What part of the wet do you actually get excited about? The fact that you're better than others? Probably
that part, because you're right. I mean, slippery rock gardens and slippery routes are kind of scary, and you usually crash more often or you get close to it. But yeah, I think I've just spent more time in those conditions, so I do feel more comfortable in them, and that when I feel like that's an advantage for me, I get excited when the race will be like that. And I think in general, I love cross-country racing because of the thrill. And I think that's, why I race mountain biking instead of another discipline, because I like the adrenaline and the thrill and, those technical features. And so when you kind of stack that up with a rock garden and some rain, yeah, I definitely get excited. And I feel like it's helps my cards, I guess.
What about the etiquette out there? Like, are you, when you come past, another competitor, you sort of, whispering in their ear something, if it's someone coming on your ride, or, hang in there, see you at the end for some cold beers, or whatever it may be, or even you might be even drilling them a bit. Yep, see ya, catch you later. Or is it more like, really respectful and, are you trying to block even? If people try and get past and you think you can hold them off to the end, you're not going to let them pass on a single trail. What are those little bits that are over the line in terms of the rules?
That's a tricky question. I think like the first time I ever raced in Europe, I realized how relentless people were. No matter what position you were in, people were blocking you. People were doing anything to not let you pass. And you have to learn the skill of passing. It's nobody's going to let you go by. I think, for me, when I'm in a race with, a good friend or a teammate, maybe that's, Specialized or Team USA, I think there's definitely more respect there of, okay, well, are you going faster? Are you fitter today? Like, maybe I won't just like block the trail completely. But I mean, that is kind of a gray line. I think the way that I like to race is more respectful. I don't want to take somebody down or block somebody out completely where they crash or something like that. I think for me, it's more a race of, I want you to have your best day and I want to have mine, and I want to be the better rider. And so for me, I think, stuff happens. People crash people out, and it's part of the racing for sure. But I think I try and be a more respectful racer when it comes to that. But I mean, I guess it depends on the day, and sometimes you make you make a mistake, or that's racing.
Well, it is a small circuit, just like the World Tour Peloton. And if you want to hang around in the circuit or the Peloton for a long time, it's like, I might just cut you up today, but it's like, hey, you're going to be here for the next 10 years, I guess. So you've just made an enemy for 10 years. So you still got to think of the long game. And choose your moments to go, going to have to burn that bridge today. It's going to be
especially with the addition of short track and at the World Cups, it's more tactical and every position counts. And we all know the riders that we don't want to be around. There are like 2 or 3 that I can think right now in my head. It's like, oh my gosh, if you see them in the race, you are getting as far away as possible, because it's like people don't exist. They just go where they want to go, where space doesn't exist, I guess. We all know who those riders are. So you don't want to be one of them.
Well, let's talk about the other discipline, and Cape Epic, you've had some success in Cape Epic. You've actually won Cape Epic. It's a really different race from what I'm understanding compared to the XC, the cross-country short racing. And after talking with Ned, it's going back to a little bit what cross-country started at, a long sort of big loop, an adventure way sort of race. Tell me the differences and, the physiology differences, but also the mindset differences when you go into the two different races.
I actually love the marathon style stage racing. I think you're right. Like what Ned said, it kind of brings you back to what the core of mountain biking is, which is an adventure. And it's almost, I think, something that we don't get to experience as much as cross country is. Cross country, you're going max for an hour and a half, and it's a different type of tired. It's a different type of suffering, I guess. And there's something about going day after day after day and seeing, how far your body can go and trying to do that again and again. And I definitely love that style. It's, it's not just 1 hour and a half race on one weekend, but it's like 3 to 6 hour ride. You've got the elements you're facing. You've got, one of the coolest part about Cape Epic is the team that you're working with. You have a teammate, and then every single day, you go back to, for us, like our support system and trying to build upon each day and not making any mistakes or having a mechanical or something like that. So it is an all-in adventure. And I think more than anything, you're right. I think it's more about your mind than even your physiology. For sure, it's different. Like for me, after the Cape Epic, I tried to go back to World's Cup racing pretty quickly. Like not long after in Brazil, we had a World Cup and we raced the short track. So for me, going from like stage race in Cape Epic and then trying to race the short track was just so insane. Like I barely survived that short track. It was just so different because it's obviously I had different you're training different systems, and it took me a while to get back to World Cup speed. It definitely builds fitness, and it's an incredible experience for sure.
Do you think it in a way, I was just hearing you talk then, do you think in a way, like I remember doing, when I became professional on the road, the bigger, the harder race I did, when I went back a level, I'm not saying World Cups are easier, but you've sort of been hardened so far that you've pushed your mental sort of stamina so far that you come back and you're ready, you could almost handle a different load of pressure and stress because you're like, I've been to the bottoms of the depths of the darkness in Cape Epic already. So coming back to this, you know what, I've only got 30 minutes left, whatever, I can do this. Whereas I can imagine in Cape Epic, something goes wrong, you're like, I've got 4 hours to go. How am I even going to do this?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that was probably the biggest thing that I learned from the Cape Epic. And I also raced the Swiss Epic in 2020 with Annika, and it was the same thing. It was like after, and that's only a 5-day stage race. So then, I felt like after that, the Swiss Epic, I was like, whoa, I totally changed my opinion on what like the human body is capable as well. Like after the first stage, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do that again. And then you got again and you're like max effort of an hour-long climb, and you're like, holy, how did I? And then you do it the next day and the next day. And then going to the Cape Epic last year, it was an 8-day stage race, right? And every day, like I actually felt better and better throughout the event. And that's insane. Like I finished and I was like, holy, like how did I do that, And then it totally changes your mental approach to your training, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe I have, 4-hour rides on the weekend. That's nothing. Now, like if I get a rest day the next day, oh my gosh, it totally changes what you think is possible. And also like for me, it just made me, I think, just more in awe of the human body, human potential, and also my mind. I think I learned so much from that race, and it definitely changed my approach to training and what's possible. It's like it totally changes your limits for sure.
All right, well, Ian, Boswell and we're heading across there as complete novices. I'm hoping I've got a little bit more up on Ian because I've been in the summer, he's been in the winter. He can climb better than I can, but maybe we're going to be somewhat even physically. What little tricks can you give us? Can you give me, actually, don't tell Ian, for the Cape Epic coming up? You're very experienced there. What sort of piece of advice have you got for me? I think
the team element is the most important part. It's everything because it's really about sharing your energy as one instead of two separate, racers. And I think it really is like putting the ego aside completely and figuring out, okay, if whoever was, I guess, the less strong rider that day, we would let that person lead the climb, and that changed, or sometimes, when we knew when to push each other. Okay, let's raise the bar. Like, are we possible or are we, capable of doing more? But sometimes it's just letting them lead the pace and then figuring out how to balance everything out. And then also just like fueling, like little things like, hey, are you drinking? Are you eating? And the race continues after the race. Like, did you sleep? Are you having enough for breakfast? It's like always being on your teammate. And I think me and Sophia just found a really good way of just, setting our ego aside and just like being one team and trying to do everything we could to win and share our energy. So like if I felt, really good, figuring out ways I would kind of slow down a little bit on single track or something with the other riders. She would like start taking up off the climb, and then I would play little like sprinting attacks with the riders behind. Cross country racing is such an individual sport, and although we have the team, outside of us, our coaches, our staff and our support teams, the bike brands, it's so much, at the end of the day, it's us on the start line and us racing, for an hour and a half. And so when it comes to something like the Cape Epic, it's really cool to share that experience with another person. And I like that part a lot.
Hey Lockie, now mountain biking, this is something that you didn't grow up doing, I didn't grow up doing, and you actually sort of took me under your wing over in Girona and said, hey, come out, it's awesome, you're going to love it. And I was like, I don't know, I really don't know, it's just so different. Mate, you've been doing it for a couple of years now, you've actually been doing a few races, you've done Cape Epic, you've done a few XC races in Girona and about, you've done some stuff over in the US. You're starting to master the craft a little bit as a roadie converted to mountain biking. What am I sort of getting myself into, mate? What can I expect? Like from the road side of things, like what are the little things I need to sort of be ready for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally different style of racing. Physically, it's not as controlled as road racing. It's a lot of short, violent efforts. You spend a lot of time, like full of lactate, heart rate through the roof. So I think that's like a big surprise because you kind of, as a road racer, you always think you've got that like fitness to lean back on, but it is a different fitness. That doesn't always translate directly. So you have to be willing to like really max it out, even if it's like 5 minutes into a 4-hour state. And that element and like the whole bunch kind of, environment doesn't exist in mountain biking. Yeah, like getting ready for that physically. And then obviously, technically, it's entirely different because you're constantly dealing with different trail obstacles that you need to be able to navigate and maintain momentum in order to go quickly. So just having that technical confidence and ability is something that as a road rider, you have to just invest time and effort into mastering.
What really crosses across? Like, what are one of the things that you've noticed? You know what? I'm actually a little bit ahead of these other guys because I'm a roadie. I'm glad that I've got that opposed to what you guys will never have got from doing, 10 years as a road pro.
I think whenever there's a bunch dynamic, you can save a lot of energy as a road rider. Like there's a lot of races, a race like Leadville in the US where there is a bit of bunch riding. Just knowing how to sit in a group and when to move and how to position, you end up spending a lot less energy.
The guys are like, oh, how hectic was that bunch? You're like, what are you talking about?
Exactly. Or they'll just spend a bunch of, bickies like riding in the wind and then you move up like right at the last minute and just like slot in. Coming from a road, that helps. Beyond that, it's pretty hard to say. I think your endurance will serve you well in that last 2-3 hours once the absolute intensity of the battles died off a bit and people start to come apart. I think as a road rider, you can lean on that ability to keep going long and strong. You'll make up a lot of spots in that last few hours. And your recovery day to day. Not that many mountain bike stage races. So like the fact that you've done grand tours and that, like one, physically, you've got that ability to back up, and two, you know what you need to do to recover day in, day out, which will help for sure.
What about this psychologically? That's what I was going to say. Like psychologically, maybe obviously I haven't been there before, but I've been there fatigue-wise. I'm not going to freak out because I've been here many a times. Day 3, let's just grind our way out of it. Does that help you at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think like any mental resilience that you have going into something difficult, especially like Cape Epic, is going to serve you well. I don't know. I think people can draw on mental resilience from a bunch of different places. So I don't know if having a road background would help, but actually having a World Tour background will help, because there's so many periods of, World Tour racing where it seems like absolutely impossible, but you're like, well, I have to just get on with it. That'll be the same for sure in this race.
One thing Nino said to me was he was grateful for the little bit of time he got a chance to race in Orica Green Edge, because it allowed him to work out how to race as a teammate, opposed to the rest of the time in his career, he races as an individual. He only has to race for himself, and he only has to worry about himself. Come to Cape Epic and the Epic series of races, the Swiss Epic and the Croc Trophy, even though he hasn't done it, but one of the legendary races. He said actually learned a lot racing in a team environment for that race. I was like, that's weird. You're only racing with one other guy. Why would that even matter? Do you think that does matter? Maybe you don't even realize that.
Yeah, no, that helps. I think like we spent so much time in a team environment, like based around, and like as a rider like yourself and like myself most of the time, you were working for someone. So you kind of constantly adapting the way you ride to someone else's style. And I think that's important in the pair dynamic, because you work out very quickly where the other person is stronger, where the other person is weaker, constantly shuffling to try and get the most out of yourself as a pair, So that might mean you're like, okay, I'm going to take this big fire road section, take all the wind here, but then this descent, I'm going to make sure I'm behind because I'm going to follow their lines, and then we're going to be quicker. Even then, like identifying when someone is starting to struggle and how hard you can push, how hard you can't push, like trying to get a sprinter over a climb, where you're like, okay, make it over with this group here. You're like, I'm going to have to like back off here, and then we're going to have to change for 15k. It's going to suck for me, but like those little things will help you get the most out of like your pairing.
Well, Boz, like I said, we're on the eve of going to Cape Epic. Was that episode enough for you? Do you feel chocked up with information? I know we've been training out on the bikes, on the trails, but now we've got the knowledge, we've done the homework. Listen to the podcast. You ready? You ready to rock and roll? What did you learn from that episode?
I mean, I learned a lot. I feel like one of the things that Nino mentioned was that he is mentally very like prepared before the races. And I feel like listening to that made me realize like, oh man, I'm very unprepared. Like I was just thinking like, what day does this race start? Like what's the, like, I think we've both just been busy like to dive into like the details of the race, which, we would have both done before, Liège-Bastogne-Liège or, Paris-Roubaix. You would know every section, you would know, all this recon, and we're kind of just flying blind, which sometimes is actually like a blessing. But, to realize that, the mental side of this is so important compared to, just going out for a ride, mountain bike ride, which we've both been doing. But just knowing, I feel like we're also both still learning equipment. There's definitely going to be a day I'm going to break out my short finger gloves.
I'm not even going to take short finger gloves. I'm not even going to venture there. I'm staying long finger. I want to go fly under the radar. I don't need anyone else working against me, let alone the mountain bike scene. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I learned a lot of that episode, but I actually love just talking to these legends and how much time they gave me. And that's one thing that I'm understanding about the mountain bike scene is very, very inclusive. And legends, like I said, Ned, the GOAT, Nino, these guys talking to us, as well as Haley, just taking time out of their day to explain to me the simple questions that I had to ask about mountain bike. They're probably thinking, oh my gosh, these guys, they are doomed for. But I'm really excited to actually finally catch up with you, Boz. It's been a few years since we've seen each other in person. Follow you around the tracks in South Africa. A massive thanks goes out to Rafa, who are putting this podcast on for us this year. A massive support towards Life in the Peloton. But of course, Wahoo as well, who are a big supporter of the podcast. Will Jones behind the scenes, who's piecing these episodes together. I'm giving him way too much audio, and he is making these episodes come to life. Meg behind the scenes, and my partner over there in Cape Epic, Ian. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for coming on board Life on the Peloton this year.
Thanks, Mitch. I do have one question in closing for you. You asked multiple times, are you scared of the start? You asked everyone, what is the start like at these races? And I feel like I think we're both scared of the start, of people sprinting off the start line at 7 a.m. with no warm up.
I'm so scared of that. Like, that's something that I was so scared with my first marathon mountain bike race. I thought it was going to be like an XC race. I was ready. I was nervous. I could feel my hands sort of tinkering on the bars, and everyone rolled off super slow. So now I'm confused. Is it going to be like the marathon one, or is it going to be like an XC? I don't know. That's why I keep asking the question. What am I in for?
Well, we're about to find out. I say we play the long game. We've got the endurance. Let's play the long game. We'll catch. Well, we may not be catching anyone on the downhill, but hopefully we can catch them over the course of a 5 or 6 hour day.
Well, Ian and I are going to be documenting our first Cape Epic. That'll be the episode in 2 weeks' time, guys. Until then, have a laugh at us on the social network, and I'll speak to you then. Cheers, Boz. See you soon.
Cheers, Mitch. Thank you.
The music in this episode was composed by Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.